everyone. I'm Aarti Nagraj, editor of Gulf Business, and we would like to extend a very warm welcome to the next session of Gulf Business Talks. Possibly one of the biggest announcements this year has been the signing of the UAE-Israel Peace Accord. Now, what this hopes to do, this deal, is to herald a new era of harmony and peace across the Middle East. A big focus as part of normalizing relationships between these countries is on improving bilateral economic ties and boosting business partnerships. We've already seen several UAE and Israeli entities enter into agreements across diverse sectors. Now that includes healthcare, finance, technology. We've seen that happening in recent weeks. But that is only the tip of the iceberg, with both sides envisioning far greater collaboration. To tell us more about this, we're very pleased to have with us today Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. She is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and a co-founder of the UAE-Israel Business Council. We also have with us Dorian Barak, another co-founder of the council. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
We'll start off with just understanding the basics of the deal. Now, what do you see as being the biggest benefits that the deal will bring about?
Well, first of all, I think it's extremely significant that Israel is making a peace deal with an Arab country in the region after, decades of no advancement. But I think what's really different about this peace deal is the desire from the Emirati side and Bahraini side for a warm peace, not just a peace on paper, not just a peace to bring some element of stability, a warm peace that can foster joint prosperity. And I think that's what makes this peace deal unique, and that's what we're all thrilled about in Israel.
From a business perspective, what kind of, we've already seen, like I mentioned, agreements, they're happening on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis almost. We're talking about it, we're covering it every day. So has there been, is this been long awaited almost in a sense? And it's like, is there a flood door that's kind of opened?
I think what you say, the way you describe it is exactly correct. The floodgates have indeed opened. Over the past decade, there has actually been increasing trade, particularly in the technology space, between the Gulf generally and the UAE in particular and Israel. This has happened a little bit below the surface. People don't like to talk about it. For the past decade, I've been working here with Israeli companies quite actively. I've always been open about who I am and where I'm from. It's never been an issue, but there's always been a sense that this is something we shouldn't advertise too widely. I think 3 specific areas where you're going to see really the floodgates open. The first is employing the UAE and Dubai in particular as a hub. It is an unparalleled hub for Israeli companies to tap the greater Middle East, South Asia, which is an enormous market, East Africa, in fact, the entire Indian Ocean basin. That's the first area. And I think you're going to see a lot of Israeli companies establishing themselves in this remarkable business hub. The second is direct export of technologies here in a much more organized and open way. And by that, I mean the areas where Israel is traditionally strong: agricultural technologies, clean technologies, solar and other renewables, the areas that you really think of when you think of the startup nation.
Sure.
Area which I think is going to be interesting is I think there's a lot of business opportunities for Emirati businesses in Israel. Emiratis are very, very advanced when it comes to the hospitality industry, development, real estate development, construction, infrastructure. Those are areas where I think Israel will directly benefit from the entry of Emirati investors in a very broad way.
You mentioned startups during your previous one. Now, Israel is considered a hub for startups, and that's an area where the UAE, as well as the GCC, there's a strong focus on building the startup ecosystem. So what kind of collaborations do you see within that space?
So, as you said, we are the startup nation, and we've been building that for a long time. In Jerusalem, actually, my town, in the last 7 years, we built an innovation ecosystem that practically did not exist. So what we've developed in Jerusalem is a methodology for building an innovation ecosystem and developing it very well. And also a methodology about how you build bridges between academia and industry. And so what we are hoping to do as a city, Jerusalem, with the UAE is to bring some of those best practices about how you develop a startup ecosystem. And of course, we're talking at the moment about joint incubators, joint accelerator programs, even hackathons to bring down the walls and get people to meet each other, and start thinking about the challenges of our century together. We can develop the solutions together. I'm very excited about that.
Another point, again, which Dorian, you mentioned, is about, trade in a sense. And currently, there are around 250 Israeli companies that are trading with the UAE. Now, where do you see that number reaching? What numbers are we looking at?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, it's very hard to gauge at this stage. I'm guessing the number is going to double within the next 3 months, meaning by the end of the year, you're going to have at least 500 Israeli businesses actively working here. I can give you examples of Israeli businesses we've spoken with recently. And of course, this goes beyond all the interest we've had in the innovation ecosystem of Jerusalem, where you've had a lot of Emirati official and semi-official bodies, investment authorities, municipalities reaching out to Jerusalem, to Fleur, to see what they can learn, how we can collaborate and benefit from one another. But I see companies like here, the Habtour moving to Israel with all of their group companies, the Al Nabuda group moving there in a much more directed way. Companies like SkyX, Age Intelligence, Jerusalem-based companies based funds in the technology sector, groups like Ventures that have expressed huge interest in doing things out here. So I think you're going to see really a flood of companies. And I think the first ones to come out in an official will be those where you've had, let's call them, already a strong international orientation. I mean, most Israelis, because Israel is a small market, have an international orientation. But there are companies that have been exploring the Emirates, they've been exploring the Gulf for quite some time. It's those companies who will be first out of the gate and first here in UAE. And similarly, it's those large, very forward-thinking groups, Al Nabuda, Habtour, that you're going to see coming out to Israel very soon.
The Emirates has a specific specialty in building and in building development that we believe we could benefit very much from in Israel, and especially Jerusalem. And of course, I'm looking at the Arab community of Jerusalem as an area that needs to be very much developed. And we would love to create some strategic partnerships with Emirati companies.
We'll come back to that, Fleur. I know that's something that's quite close to your heart. But, Dorian, what you were talking about, companies from here moving there is a lot of interest, but is there clarity on the process? So let's say a business here is interested in moving to Israel. What do they do? How do they go about that process?
Well, I think first of all, Israel is a relatively easy country to get to know, despite the language barriers. Many people speak English, and most people speak English, and the authorities make it, although everything is done in Hebrew officially, you tend to find people who can assist you with that. I think the first thing any Emirati group has to do is to find a local partner or local people with whom to work. It's very difficult to do it on one's own. Let me just give you an example. To have a strong Israeli partner, I think it's very important to find somebody local, somebody who knows your culture, but who knows the local environment. It's critical. The second thing is there's a lot of Emirati groups that are going to be making their way to Israel, and they're going to find a very welcoming, hospitable climate. So let me just give you an example. In Jerusalem, they're planning a Silicon Valley development in the eastern part of the city, large Arab population. If a group like MR, and I invite them to, which you see all over Dubai, were to come to Fleur and say, we want to develop, we want to build, we want to construct, we want to create something here, I think that the authorities will be more than welcoming.
Absolutely. That's really the idea of me being here, and the reason why we created the council in the first place. We're talking, regarding your question earlier about how best to do business. We created a platform to make it easier for people to do business, not just with getting to know the culture, but the procedure, the regulations, but to actually partner people up with local partners on the ground on both sides. And that's really one of the main reasons that we created the council and our online platform.
So the ease of business, so to speak, for any company, let's say it's, I know there are a lot of startups even from this region now who want to have first mover advantage, go there, when things are still starting up. So is it easy for them in a sense, and are procedures there easy? Just to get an understanding, because this is all new for a lot of people here.
This is about Dubai in particular is about the easiest place in the world to set up.
Yes.
So it's not quite so easy. But I think you will find it's actually more straightforward, because here there are many different places to incorporate and many different ways to set up your business. Israel, there's a pretty standard procedure.
Okay.
They're very, very welcoming to foreigners. We have, similar to Emiratis, I mean, there's a lot we have in common. We have almost no domestic market. We're a tiny nation that, despite its size, achieves incredible things, like the Emirates, but in different areas. So our capabilities are really complementary, but I think you'll find that all Emirati companies looking for a partner and looking for, ease in doing business will find somebody to give them a soft landing.
Brilliant. We'll come now, Fleur, to the topic close to your heart about East Jerusalem. You've been promoting the cause for greater economic inclusion and more job opportunities for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. So what kind of an impact do you think this deal will have on that situation?
So first of all, I believe that Jerusalem, as our capital city, and also, in fact, the largest Arab city in the country in terms of its population, is the perfect platform for building the bridge between UAE and Bahrain and Israel. We have 37% Arab-speaking population in the city. We have a part of the city that needs an influx of development and good job opportunities. We have a budding innovation atmosphere also in East Jerusalem, with more Arab-speaking engineers in the city that we've ever seen. And so I feel all the pieces of the puzzle are in place. And what we're trying to do in the council is put it all together, put that puzzle together. I have received a very warm reception from the Arab community in East Jerusalem, both with tourism ties and technology ties. We have an accelerator in the city, for example, incubator accelerator in the Arab part of the city, which is so excited about creating a partnership with the innovation players here in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai. And so, like I said, all the pieces are in place, and we're just trying to put it all together as we speak. I think in general, they can't say this too loud, but I think in general, the Arab community in East Jerusalem is thrilled by the opportunities.
From the council perspective, you mentioned to me that you've seen a lot of interest. So what are the different steps that you're taking to, improve business ties? What are the various initiatives that you have planned?
So we have a series of educational encounters between Emiratis and Israelis planned. By that we mean Zoom meetings, roundtables online for the present time, but also in person. I mean, Fleur's here. We're having a roundtable. The Women's Forum of the UAE-Israel Business Council is having a large event. Women are getting together, serious women, professionals, public figures, business people, to talk about opportunities for collaboration. We also intend to have a conference in the early part of the year, in the early part of 2021. We haven't settled on a date because of COVID, of course, to bring together Israeli and Emirati business people. I can tell you on an individual level, we get a lot of outreach from people. We have founding members are pretty prominent business people on the Israeli and Emirati side, and we found it a really easy experience to send referrals in both directions, to introduce Emiratis to serious counterparts on the Israeli side, and vice versa.
I want to add that tourism is something very important to both Israelis and Emiratis. We can come on holiday 2-3 hours away in our own region for the first time. And we're really looking forward to receiving a new type of tourism to Israel, to Jerusalem in particular, which is Muslim pilgrims coming to pray in Arma Sharif. And so the tourism ties are very, very important, very significant, can bring a lot of course, accompanying business with it. And on top of that, I think the council is not just facilitating these conversations, but Dorian and I are actively looking for the opportunities to actually build deals which will be game-changing for both countries.
Talking about tourism, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues who are really excited about coming to Tel Aviv, but what is the visa process like? Do you see, easier visa processes to ensure a lot of residents here, expats here who would love to travel there as well? So you expect to see easier visa processes? Is that something that you're working on?
Well, I think it's something that it's necessary. Otherwise, if it becomes cumbersome to travel, then people travel a lot less. I know that these things are being ironed out at the moment. At the moment, still, it's difficult travel for Israelis with only one passport. So from what I understand, these things are being ironed out right now. Dorian, if you have any further information on that?
I know there's a special task force that's been charged with dealing with this. First of all, there are Emiratis who have foreign passports. There are all kinds of expats here who may be able to get these on arrival in Israel when travel resumes because of COVID.
Yes.
Virtually shut down. But I anticipate that the estimates are that by the beginning of the year, travel will become much easier. Generally speaking, by then everybody anticipates the visa issue will be resolved, and we can begin to see a huge influx of Israelis here and Emiratis, both citizens and residents, to Israel.
I think the COVID is like
So
build something with your hand tied behind your back at the moment.
yeah, it's true. It's I don't think anybody anticipated the situation would be the way it is right now, end of the year, but it is what it is. But it's interesting that despite COVID being there, the deal has gone through and that the council is able to continue its work and facilitate all of this.
Artie, I have to say that in all our conversations and the new friends that we've made, what is really very clear is that both sides have a real thirst for a warm peace. And I've never experienced that. I think we're living in historic times. We're curious about each other. We want to get to know each other. People have so many cultural and religious questions. And it's so interesting and exciting. And we're really making history here.
It's true. It's historic. I mean, that's the word that we used every time we were reporting about this. Lastly, looking ahead now, we saw the UAE first sign the deal, and then we also had Bahrain join in. Do you anticipate more GCC, more Arab states following the same path anytime in the near future?
I'll let Fleur address the diplomatic issue, which is her expertise. I'll tell you from a business perspective, though. Our countries in the region, I don't want to mention any names, but who have actually approached us as the UAE-Israel Business Council, begging us to expand to their countries as well. And I think it's really exciting. I will tell you that I think just as below the surface, there was a lot of contacts between Emiratis and Israelis, commercial contacts, personal contacts. And that's why we established the UAE-Israel Business Council even before the peace agreement was signed in June. There are budding contacts now between Israelis and citizens of other countries in the region, which are now expanding. So that kind of below the surface development of commercial and personal ties is growing very, very quickly in the shadow, so to speak, of the very bold and brave move that the Emiratis have taken and the Bahrainis vis-a-vis Israel.
Absolutely. Well, I think what was historic is always the first person to jump into the pool is the brave. And the UAE, we have even a biblical reference of Nachshon, who jumped into the sea first before Moses parted the sea. He was the only one who believed it. And so that's the UAE. And they've opened endless possibilities with being really the first country who was brave. We believe it's going to be a domino effect. Dorian is right. Just like there was a kind of a low boil normalization before the peace was announced, this exists with other countries. And we hope that when they see the common prosperity and the opportunity and the way that this goes very positively, that others will jump into the fray sooner rather than later. We're very excited by what this could bring, but the UAE gets the credit for really opening the floodgates.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. We're really looking forward to a lot of more interesting discussions. I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of curiosity because it's something new. And in this day and age, that kind of curiosity is limited almost in a sense.
Artie, I was quoted in a newspaper saying that it feels like we're dating. And that's really how it feels like.
Very true. That's a nice one. That's a nice one, Fleur. But yeah, really looking forward to a lot more discussions as we progress, I think, and understand more of what the implications of this deal are and what the future holds for this region, for the UAE, Israel, and the wider Gulf Arab region and Israel. I think, like you mentioned, this is historic, and we'll wait to see what comes up next in history. Thank you so much for your time today and for all the insights. To all our listeners, we hope you found this really beneficial. We are looking forward to more such sessions to understand more and see where this deal brings us next. Do let us know all your feedback and comments. Please follow Gulf Business on all our social platforms on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thank you very much.